My ex-husband is scrubbing saddle leather in my royal stables right now, on his knees, in the mud, and from the obsidian throne where I'm sitting, draped in silk that costs more than his entire territory. I can see him through the window. He doesn't look up anymore. 11 months ago, that same man stood in front of our entire pack on our 5th anniversary, tore the gift I'd spent 4 months making in half, dropped the pieces into a wine carafe, and said, "I've chosen Vanessa. She's carrying my real heir. You can go." I was 3 weeks pregnant when he said that, standing in a dress I'd sewn myself because he'd frozen my money, surrounded by people I'd bled for, and not one of them looked at me when I walked out. His beta blocked the bedroom. Alpha's orders, take nothing. So I walked into a blizzard barefoot, pregnant, no coat, no shoes, no name, with the sound of the party still going behind me as if I'd never been born. That's where this story should have ended. Frozen body in a ditch. Another woman, the pack forgot by spring, but someone was watching from the tree line that night. Someone who wasn't Silver Moon, someone whose name makes every alpha on this continent drop to one knee and beg for air. He watched Philip throw me away, and then he decided to pick me up. This is how an anniversary gift gets repaid. The blizzard didn't care that I was pregnant. I need to say that because people romanticize snowstorms in stories like these. They make them beautiful, cinematic, a backdrop for transformation. No, a blizzard when you're barefoot and 3 weeks pregnant and wearing a cotton dress is just a slow way to kill 2 people. I, and the thing inside me that nobody wanted. I made it maybe a quarter mile from the lodge before my legs stopped cooperating. The snow was up to my shins, and my feet had gone from pain to silence. That dangerous silence where the body stops complaining because it started making decisions without your permission. I went down on one knee, then both. The snow packed around me like it had been waiting. Behind me, the Silver Moon Lodge was still lit. I could hear the bass notes of the music. Laughter. Someone was toasting something. Maybe Philip. Maybe Vanessa. Maybe the future they were building on the exact spot where mine had just been demolished. I put my hand on my stomach. Not because I thought it would help. What was I going to do? Warm a baby with frozen fingers? I did it because it was the only thing left in the world that was mine. Everything else, the pack, the house, the pendant, the name, the 5 years, was gone. But this tiny, ridiculous, impossible thing that Philip had called a weak pregnancy, without even knowing it existed, this was still mine. And I was about to kill it by freezing to death in a field. That's the thought I was having when the wolves behind me went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The way a room goes silent when someone pulls a gun. The laughter stopped. The music stopped. Even the wind seemed to pull back, as the storm itself had just been told to sit down. I heard the lodge doors open. Not one of them. All of them. Both double doors flung wide, and the warm light that poured out hit the snow around me in a yellow rectangle that felt like a spotlight I hadn't asked for. Then the sound. Boots. But not the clumsy, drunk boots of Philip's pack. These were measured, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had never once in his life needed to hurry because the world rearranged itself around his schedule, not the other way around. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body had gone rigid, and not from the cold. Something in the air had changed at a molecular level. A pressure, a density, like the atmosphere had doubled its weight in the space of a single breath, and every living thing within 100 yards was suddenly, acutely aware that it was prey. The wolves inside the lodge, I found this out later, had dropped. Not kneeled, dropped. Philip included. Not a choice, a biological response. Their wolves recognized something their human brains couldn't process fast enough, and their legs buckled before their pride could intervene. Footsteps in the snow, coming toward me. Not toward the lodge, not toward Philip, toward the pregnant woman on her knees in a blizzard in a cotton dress. He walked past the lodge like it was a gas station on a highway, not worth stopping for. 40 wolves inside, an alpha at the head table, a territory worth 3 generations of bloodline politics, and he walked past it like it was scenery. He stopped in front of me. I looked up, and the first thing I saw wasn't his face. It was his knees, hitting the snow. The Alpha King of the Eastern Sovereignty, the man whose name was a border warning, whose territory stretched across 6 mountain ranges, whose wolves numbered in the tens of thousands, was kneeling in the snow in front of me. Matthias. I didn't know his face then. I learned it later. The sharp jaw, the silver threading through black hair at the temples. The eyes that were so dark they looked like the obsidian I'd eventually sit on. But in that moment, all I registered was the impossible geometry of what was happening. The most powerful wolf on the continent, on his knees, in front of the woman who had just been told she could go. He didn't speak to Philip. He didn't acknowledge the lodge. He looked at me, at my frozen hands, at my bare feet, at my belly where my palm was still pressed flat. And he said 5 words. "How far along are you?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Who did this to you?" He skipped every question that centers on the damage and went straight to the one that centers on the life, the future, the thing that was still growing while everything around it was dying. I said, 3 weeks. My voice came out cracked and small, and I hated the sound of it. Something moved across his face. Not pity. I'd seen enough pity in the last hour to recognize it blindfolded. This was something else. Calculation. Recognition. Like he was reading a language written on my skin that I didn't know I was speaking. He took off his coat. Not dramatically, not the sweeping, cinematic gesture you're imagining. He just shrugged it off and placed it around my shoulders, the way you'd put a blanket on a sleeping child. Efficiently, without asking, like the alternative, not doing it, had never occurred to him as an option. Then he turned toward the lodge. Every wolf inside was on the floor. Philip was on his hands and knees near the head table. Vanessa pressed against the wall behind him, and the room was so quiet I could hear the candle wax dripping. Matthias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The woman you just threw into a blizzard is carrying a child of the true lunar line. You are going to regret this for the rest of your life, and I'm going to make sure the rest of your life is very, very long." He turned back to me, extended his hand. "Come. You're done here." I took it, and I want to be honest. I didn't take it because I trusted him. I didn't take it because I felt saved. I took it because his hand was warm and mine was dying. And the last person who should have offered me warmth had just poured wine on my vows. I took it because I was out of options, and sometimes that's how the best doors open. Not with faith, but with nothing left to lose. I'd never seen a room designed for one person before. Rooms in the Silver Moon were shared, earned, and rationed. You got a corner. You got a wall. If Philip was feeling generous, you got a window. But the room Matthias walked me into on the first night wasn't a room. It was an apology from the universe, and it was addressed specifically to me. The walls were lined with something his attendants called lunar silk. I didn't know what that meant then. I know now. Lunar silk is woven once a year during the winter solstice by a guild of weavers who work only by moonlight. Not for spiritual reasons, but because the thread reacts to heat and can only be handled at night temperatures. It takes 11 months to produce enough silk for a single room. The color shifts depending on the light. Silver in the morning, pale blue at dusk, almost white under the moon. It breathes. You can feel the air move through it. It's alive in a way fabric has no business being alive. And when I pressed my hand against the wall that first night, the silk warmed under my palm as it recognized me. I stood in the center of that room in my frozen cotton dress and my bleeding feet, and I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I didn't cry because crying would have meant I understood what was happening, and I didn't. My brain was still standing in a blizzard. My body was in a palace. The distance between those two realities was so vast that my nervous system simply refused to translate. I just stood there, touching a wall, feeling it warm under my hand. And somewhere underneath the numbness, a very small voice was saying, "This is a trick. This has to be a trick. Because people like me don't end up in rooms like this. People like me end up in ditches." Matthias's women, his attendants, not lovers, I asked, bathed me in water that smelled like cedar and iron. They treated my feet, wrapped them in the same lunar silk that lined the walls, which apparently had healing properties when applied to skin. They fed me broth with herbs I couldn't name and bread that was still warm from the oven. And they did all of this without speaking, without pity, without the performance of kindness that I'd grown so used to in the Silver Moon, that I'd forgotten kindness could exist without an audience. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, there was sunlight, real, golden, unfiltered sunlight, coming through windows that stretched floor to ceiling. And outside those windows was a forest. Not just any forest. A canopy of ancient growth. The kind of trees that take 600 years to reach that height. They stretched as far as I could see. Silver-barked, cathedral quiet. The kind of woods that make you want to whisper even though nobody's asked you to. I found out that afternoon what those woods cost. Matthias had signed a decree that morning. 1 page, 3 sentences, effective immediately. Philip's southern hunting grounds, 200 square miles of ancestral forest that had been in his bloodline for 9 generations, were seized under royal domain law and redesignated as sacred walking grounds for the Queen in waiting. For my morning walks, 200 square miles of another man's legacy, stripped with a signature and a stamp, because Matthias had decided that the woman carrying the true lunar air should have somewhere beautiful to stretch her legs. I should have felt something noble in that moment. Gratitude, justice, the warm satisfaction of watching karma do its work. But what I actually felt was a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, because I recognized the mechanics. One person deciding another person's worth with a piece of paper. One signature erasing what someone else spent a lifetime building. I'd been on the receiving end of that arithmetic 11 months ago. The difference was that this time, I was the reason the pen moved. They told me Philip received the news at dawn, that he read the decree 3 times, that he went into his study and didn't come out for 2 days, that when he finally emerged, he looked like something had been removed from behind his eyes. Not sadness, not rage, but the part of a man that still believes the ground beneath him is solid. I knew that look. I'd worn it in a blizzard. And here's the thing I couldn't say to anyone then, the thing I'm only saying now because this story requires honesty, or it's worth nothing. A part of me was glad, and a part of me was terrified. Because the glad part felt exactly like Philip. Matthias talked to my belly. I need you to know that because it reframes everything else he did. Every decree, every seizure, every act of political violence that looked like vengeance from the outside. He would kneel on the floor of my room every morning, press his ear to my stomach, close his eyes, and listen like there was a frequency coming from inside me that only he could hear. I asked him once what he was listening to. The hum, he said. Every child of the true lunar line has a resonance, a vibration that begins in the womb and grows louder as the bloodline strengthens. Your child hums at a pitch I haven't heard in 200 years. I didn't know what to do with that. I was still adjusting to the idea that the baby growing inside me wasn't a weakness, which is what Philip had taught me pregnancy was. A liability, a delay, a thing that happens to women who aren't useful enough to be anything else. Matthias was treating this pregnancy like the most important event in his kingdom's history. And the distance between that reality and the one I'd left was so extreme that some mornings I'd catch myself waiting for him to laugh, to admit the joke, to say, "You actually believed me?" the way Philip used to whenever I took his kindness at face value. He never laughed. He just listened, every morning, ear to my belly, eyes closed, and I'd sit there with my hand in his hair, which I didn't decide to do. It just happened one morning. My fingers moved on their own the way your body sometimes makes decisions your trust issues haven't approved yet. And I'd think, this is either the safest I've ever been or the most elaborate trap ever built. And I couldn't tell which. And that inability to tell, that permanent flinch, was Philip's real legacy. Not the exile, not the blizzard, the flinch. The part of me that couldn't receive warmth without scanning it for poison. Then Philip made his move. 4 months into my pregnancy, a formal petition arrived at the Eastern Sovereignty, sealed with the silver moon crest, addressed to the Royal Council. Philip was claiming paternity. He argued that the child was conceived under his bond, in his territory, during his marriage, and therefore the heir belonged to Silver Moon, regardless of where the mother currently resided. He wasn't trying to get me back. Let me be clear about that. He didn't want me. He wanted the heir. He'd heard the rumors about the true lunar line, and he'd done the math that every small man does when he realizes he threw away something valuable. He tried to repossess it. Matthias read the petition at breakfast. I watched his face. Nothing moved. Not his jaw, not his eyes, not a single muscle. He set the paper down, picked up his tea, drank it, and then said to his chief of law, "Invoke the erasure doctrine." I didn't know what that meant. The chief of law went pale, which told me it was serious. The erasure doctrine is an ancient royal statute that has been used exactly 4 times in the history of the Eastern Sovereignty. It doesn't just strip a man of his title. It strips him of his name, His bloodline records are removed from every archive, every census, every territorial ledger. His ancestral lands are reclassified as unclaimed. His children, if he had any, are reassigned to the maternal line. He ceases to exist legally, historically, genetically. He becomes what the old laws call the nameless, not a punishment, an unpersoning. Philip woke up as an alpha with a territory, a bloodline, and a claim. By noon, he was no one, not even a footnote. And the part that made my hands shake, the part I'm telling you because this story is nothing if I'm not honest in it, is that Matthias did it over breakfast. Between the tea and the toast, the way you'd swat a fly, the way you'd handle something so small it barely interrupts your morning, that's power, real power. And I was growing it inside me. The question I couldn't stop asking myself, the one that kept me awake at night with my hand on my belly and my eyes on the ceiling, was simple. Was I the woman being protected, or was I the weapon being loaded? Matthias told me the truth on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because the lunar silk had turned silver that morning, which meant the moon cycle was resetting, and I'd been counting the weeks by the color of my walls, because calendars still felt like a luxury I didn't trust myself to own. We were sitting in the library. My feet were in his lap. He did that now, pulled my feet onto his legs without asking whenever I sat down near him. The way you develop small rituals with someone when the intimacy has become structural rather than performative. He was reading a territorial brief. I was pretending to read a book about the Eastern sovereignty's medicinal herbs and actually thinking about whether I'd ever stop waiting for this life to be revoked. He set the brief down, looked at me, and his face did something I hadn't seen before. It softened and hardened simultaneously. The way a person's face moves when they're about to hand you something precious and heavy. There's something you need to know about why I found you. Not how. Why? That distinction sat in the room like a third person. The true lunar line doesn't awaken through birth. It doesn't awaken through ceremony or training or any of the rituals the old books describe. It awakens through one thing only: a betrayal of the highest order, committed on a fated milestone by the person closest to the bloodline carrier. He let that settle. I let it settle. The library was so quiet I could hear the silk breathing on the walls. Your anniversary wasn't a coincidence, Margaret. The bond you shared with Philip, the 5-year milestone, and the public nature of the rejection, those were the exact conditions required to unlock the lunar resonance in your bloodline. Philip didn't just hurt you, he activated you. I stared at him. My hand had gone to my belly without my permission. That reflex again, the one that fires whenever the world tilts, and the only anchor I have is the life inside me. You're telling me he crowned me by destroying me. I'm telling you that the power inside your child, the hum I hear every morning, exists because of what Philip did to you on that anniversary. If he'd been kind to you, if he'd honored the bond, if he'd simply been decent, the bloodline would have stayed dormant, possibly forever. I should tell you what I felt in that moment. The instructions of this story demand honesty, and honesty is what I'm going to give you, even though it makes me look like someone I don't want to be. I felt cheated. Not by Philip. I'd already grieved Philip. I felt cheated by the math, because what Matthias was telling me was that my suffering had a purpose, that the worst night of my life was actually the most important night of my life, and I know that's supposed to feel like redemption. I know the shape of the story people want here, The woman who discovers her pain was a chrysalis and emerges grateful for the breaking. But I wasn't grateful. I was furious, because purpose doesn't erase pain. It just makes the pain load-bearing. And I didn't want my worst memory to be the foundation of my best life. I wanted a best life that had nothing to do with Philip at all. I said none of this to Matthias. What I said was, "Does Philip know?" "No." "Does he know he was the key?" "He will, tonight." That night, they brought Philip to the palace gates. I didn't ask to see him. Matthias didn't offer, but I heard. The guard said he walked the last mile on bare feet. Whether by choice or because he had nothing left to wear, nobody could confirm. He was thin. His hair was matted. His eyes were the color of a man who'd been living inside a question he couldn't answer. How did the woman I threw away end up on a throne? He knelt at the gate, not from the alpha frequency, not from royal command. He knelt because his legs gave out, and from the courtyard, in a voice that the guard said barely carried past his own lips, he begged. Not for forgiveness, not for Margaret, for food. The man who once poured wine on my vows was on his knees at my gate asking for bread. And the universe didn't even have the decency to make it rain. It was a clear night. Stars everywhere. Beautiful. The kind of sky that makes suffering feel obscene because the world around it refuses to match. Everyone expected me to exile him. Matthias had the paperwork ready. 3 routes to the uncharted wastes. The frozen no man's land where disgraced wolves are sent to disappear. Clean, efficient. The same arithmetic that had been done to me, done to him, poetic, symmetrical. The kind of ending that makes a good story and lets everyone move on. I said no, not out of mercy. I want to be precise about that because mercy is what people will call it later when they retell the story and sand down the edges to make me noble. Mercy would have been exile. Mercy would have been letting him vanish into the frost and rebuild something small and quiet in a territory that didn't know his name. Mercy would have been an ending. I didn't give him an ending. I gave him a view. I sentenced Philip to the royal stables. Permanent. No release date, no review. He feeds the horses, he mucks the stalls. He sleeps in the quarters behind the tack room where the hay is thin and the walls don't block the wind. And every morning, every single morning, he walks into the stable yard and sees me. Walking in the sacred woods he lost. Wearing the silk he could never afford. Carrying the child he called weak. Standing beside the man who knelt for me in the snow while Philip was still inside toasting his own cruelty. That's not mercy. That's a mirror. And here's what I've learned about mirrors that I didn't know a year ago. Exile is a locked door. You pound on it, you grieve it, and eventually you walk away because there's nothing left to look at. But a mirror is an open door you can never walk through. Philip can see everything. He can see the life he threw away in full color, every day, 30 yards from his shovel. And he can never touch it, never re-enter it, never close his eyes long enough to forget it's there. Exile lets you build a story about what you lost. You romanticize it. You rewrite history. You tell yourself it wasn't that good anyway, that you're better off, that the woman you discarded probably suffered without you. Exile lets you lie to yourself. The stables don't let Philip lie. The stables make him witness the truth every morning before breakfast. And the truth is unbearable, not because I'm thriving out of spite, but because I'm thriving without him mattering at all. He's not my villain anymore. He's not my origin story. He's a man who mucks stalls in the background of a life that doesn't reference him. That's the thing about punishment that people get wrong. The cruelest sentence isn't pain. It's irrelevance. It's being close enough to see that the world you burned kept building without you. And it's beautiful. And you're not in it. Some nights, I stand on the balcony and see his lantern in the stable window. A small yellow square of light in the dark. And I think about anniversaries. Philip believed our 5th anniversary was the night he replaced me. He was wrong. It was the night he paid the down payment on a debt he will never finish repaying. See, every morning he wakes up in that stable is an interest payment. Every glimpse of my life from the dirt is a late fee. The principal grows, it never shrinks. There is no final installment. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Margaret, is this justice or is this cruelty? I think about that too. Every night, looking at that small yellow light. But here's what I've come to understand. And this is the thing I want you to take from this story more than anything else. Justice and cruelty aren't opposites, they're neighbors. They share a wall, and the only difference between them is which side of the mirror you're standing on. Philip would call this cruelty. I would call this a consequence. And we'd both be telling the truth. That's what makes it unbearable. Not that one of us is wrong, but that neither of us is. I still don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure clean answers exist for women who've been thrown into blizzards. I want to talk to you for a second. Not as Margaret, as the voice telling you this story. Somebody watching this right now is standing in their own blizzard, barefoot, in a dress they sewed themselves, being told by someone who was supposed to love them that they can go, that they're replaceable, that the thing growing inside them, not a baby necessarily, but a dream, a talent, a version of themselves they haven't met yet, is weak, not worth keeping, not worth staying for. I need you to hear what Margaret heard that night in the snow. Footsteps, not behind you, in front of you, walking toward you, unhurried, certain. The footsteps of something that already knows your name and your bloodline, and the hum inside you that nobody else has bothered to listen to. You don't have to trust it yet. You don't have to believe it's real. You just have to take the hand. Even if the only reason you take it is that your fingers are freezing and you're out of options. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's how thrones begin. This has been Forbidden Luna Stories. Subscribe if this one found you on the right night. Leave a comment. Tell me which line you felt in your chest. The next story is already written, and it's worse, and it's better. And you're not ready. I'll see you there.